Welcome to my Biden versus DeSantis prediction, so let's start. And there we go, so first off, let's start for the obvious one. For example, New Jersey, I think it just barely drops down to a likely margin. I think if we go back to previous election, it was 15.9 in 2020, and in 2016, in this election, it was 14.1, and I think that it just narrowly drops down to a likely. Not that much of a difference. So for the other states, first of all, I think Texas is an easy one for Ron DeSantis. I think he does better than Donald Trump. I think Ron DeSantis overall does way better. In the Sunbelt region, I think he wins Texas by around 9 to 11% quite easily, while for his home state of Florida, I think Ron DeSantis, since he is the governor of this state, it will be quite close to maybe even the level of his win in Texas. But I see Ron DeSantis winning here by either 6 to 8% or maybe 7 to 9% quite easily. And first of all, or I should say moving on, Colorado, I don't see too much of a difference in this state. I think it does drop off to a certain extent from 2020, of course. I think it probably drops down, not that much, but probably like 9 to 11% if I had to make a guess right now. And for Ohio, I think he does quite well in the Rust Belt section of the country. He narrowly wins Iowa by a safe margin, but I think that's not because of how good he is in the Rust Belt, but because of the lack by the Democratic Party in this area of the country. And I see him, Ron DeSantis, winning this state by 8 to 10%. And let's see if there's any other ones. Oh, yeah, of course. For the state of North Carolina, I see Ron DeSantis actually winning North Carolina by a likely margin. As I've said, I think he does way better in the Sunbelt section of the country, and I see him carrying North Carolina probably around a 5% margin, just above the threshold for it to be a likely state. And of course, for the state of Virginia, you could make a case that it could drop to lean, and I would not be surprised about that. I think it does get quite closer to the lean margin in this scenario with Ron DeSantis. In my opinion, it drops from 10%, probably around to, if I had to guess right now, 5 to 7%, so maybe like a 6% win by the Democrats in this state, but still a big drop off from 2020, of course. And for the 2nd district of Maine, I'm not too sure about this one, but I think that Ron DeSantis still wins here by a likely margin. I'm not too sure of how he will do in the more Republican section of the Northeast. I'm gonna guess he does similar to what Trump did. I think Trump really is good a candidate for this section of the country, mostly in like the 2nd district of Maine. I'm gonna guess that Ron DeSantis wins here by give or take 7 to 9%. Still a decent win for him in this district. And that's it for the likely states, if I'm not mistaken. And as you can see, after the safe states and the likely states, Biden has 204 electoral votes while DeSantis has 235 electoral votes. So starting off for the lean states, first of all, I'm gonna talk about why not? First of all, New Mexico. New Mexico would barely drop, in my opinion, down to a lean margin. I think Ron DeSantis, as I've said before in this video, does better in this section of the country, and I think New Mexico drops down to either at most 6% for Biden, but because it's Ron DeSantis, I think Ron DeSantis does win the state by a margin of 4%, which is really a good win for the GOP in this section of the country. And for the neighboring states of Arizona, I think Ron DeSantis actually wins here by a lean margin, just the opposite direction for both states. I think Ron DeSantis does quite good with Latino voters, and he gets more of the Mexican Latino vote than other people would, and which is why you would see, these not drastic, but these low margins for the Democrats and high margins for the GOP in these states. And he wins Arizona quite easily by, I'm gonna guess, 1 to 3%, but I would not be surprised if it's like 2 to 4%. And for the next, let's talk about Maine at large. I think not much of a difference here. I think it drops down to 2016 levels for Joe Biden. He still wins Maine at large by a decent margin, but a lean margin in my opinion, probably around 2 to 4%. Quite easily a win for him though. And for the following other states, I'm gonna talk. Before I do other states, I'm gonna talk first of all about Georgia. I think Ron DeSantis at the moment is one of the few Republicans that would be able to keep Georgia in the lean column come 2024. He does better in the rural areas of the country and even in the suburbs, I think. If we go back to 2016, he doesn't get 2016 margins unless something horrible happens to the economy, which could, in fact, happen in our timeline. And in 2020, Biden barely won the state of Georgia by a small margin. And I think Ron DeSantis wins here quite easily by a margin of like 1 to 3%. And let's go to other states. Before I talk about Wisconsin, let's talk briefly about Minnesota. So I believe that Minnesota does drop off from 2020, of course. And it does by a decent margin, I think. Ron DeSantis does quite good in the suburbs, but I just don't see him having as much of an impact in the Rust Belt as what Donald Trump would do in 2024. It still drops from 7%. Not as bad as 2016, sorry about that. Joe Biden still wins here by probably a margin of like 2 to 4%. But on the other hand, for Wisconsin, Ron DeSantis does quite well. I think he barely wins Wisconsin by a lean margin of 1 to 3%, I think. He does better than, what Trump did in 2020, but I think Trump would probably get a higher number if he were the nominee in 2024. He still wins, Wisconsin by a lean margin, which is still an outstanding feat for him. While for other states, let me check, is that it for the lean states? And yeah, that's it for the lean states. So for the tough states, first of all, let me talk about the 2nd district of Nebraska. I think it is quite more narrow compared to other predictions I've done. I think Joe Biden still wins it, but only by a small margin, a tilt margin in this scenario. I think Ron DeSantis does do better in the suburbs overall throughout the country. It drops down to tilt margin, still a Biden win in this district. On the other hand, for Pennsylvania, I think Ron DeSantis narrowly is not able to win this state by a lean margin. I think he barely misses out on it being a lean. I think he wins here by a margin of like 0.75%, if I had to make a guess right now. I think Joe Biden being his home state helps him out a bit. But I don't see Ron DeSantis getting as much of a appeal in the Rust Belt compared to Trump. I think if it was Trump, the GOP would in fact win Pennsylvania quite easily by a tilt margin. But I see the GOP still winning here, but only by a tilt margin with Ron DeSantis. But even then, Ron DeSantis still has more Rust Belt appeal than most candidates. It's just that Trump just has way more in the Rust Belt here. And let's move on to first of all, Michigan. So yeah, we're in the Rust Belt. So for Michigan, I think Joe Biden does not get the turnout that he got in 2020. I think the economy is not going to be good by 2024. It could be even worse. It could maybe even look like 2008, but I'm not going to assume too much. I'm going to assume it stays at this level. And I see Ron DeSantis, doing way better than what the GOP did in 2020, and probably similar numbers in Pennsylvania and Michigan. If Ron DeSantis is the nominee in 2024, I think it's a narrow win for the GOP in Michigan, but he still wins this state by probably a margin of 0.5%, if I had to make a guess. And for the following states, for Nevada, I do think Ron DeSantis gets a bigger victory in Nevada than what he does in Michigan, of course. He still wins it probably around like a high tilt margin, if I had to guess. Probably around 0.65% to 0.85%. I do think the Sunbelt appeal does trickle down, or I should say, does include Nevada as a whole. It's a narrow win, but still a decent win for the GOP in the state of Nevada. And finally, for the state of New Hampshire, I think it will be probably one of the closest races in this election. And I do think it will be quite close to what we saw in 2016. It will be something around 0.25% or near that margin. And I see Joe Biden barely, and I mean barely, winning this state by a tilt margin in this election. And as you can see, I see Ron DeSantis winning with 312 electoral votes against Joe Biden's 226 electoral votes. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video.